mentioned a bit about the motorsport influence on the Isle of Man. You hear racers say, and I've heard it said, that in their racing careers, they've seen a dramatic decrease in the amount of insects splattered on their visors.
Oh, yeah.
Now, this is a point that very different listenerships will have heard about. Are there other concerns, Richard? Maybe one for you about decreases in the health of whatever species it might be on the Isle of Man more recently.
Yes, I mean, somebody has termed what we're living in as the Anthropocene, because there's no doubting that man has the prime effect on the planet now. And a recent paper noted that we expect there to be potentially extinction of 40% of the world's insect species over the next few decades. Now, shortly we should be hearing from a consensus of the world's experts on biodiversity, on wildlife, on what's likely to happen, because there's an intergovernmental panel, as there has been on climate change, which was very influential on taking forward a public view and engagement, and thereby policy and politicians, on what is happening and therefore what should occur to take account of that. Hopefully the report that will come out from the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity may be able to engage the public in a similar manner to actually understand what the issues are realistically with the facts from around the world. And there's no doubting that we're subject to these changes as much as anybody else, but it's obviously different in the tropics to what it is here, different species affected. Yes, there are big changes happening, and we should definitely take account of that.
Tim has mentioned some of the protests in London we've seen over the past fortnight from Extinction Rebellion, kind of under the banner that we're facing, or we're in the midst of, a bit of an ecological crisis. Do you feel as though that's a sensationalised kind of viewpoint, or, I mean, it would appear that the evidence suggests that's quite accurate?
Yeah, I think the evidence does. Neil's done some evidence close to home and got a wider insect. We know that 25% of the plants on island from the flora that the Wildlife Trust work on are at risk, major risk, and things as well. Certainly if you talk to the entomologists, then they're concerned heavily about the abundance and biomass of invertebrates, not just what species are where and things. So although it's very hard and time consuming and obviously costs money to really get concrete data, it certainly seems to be supported that it is, and that we're feeling some level of it as well. So the kind of action that we need to be thinking about is how we give that space to functioning nature, that it's allowed to recover. I know we mentioned the campaign Wild the Future that we've had an exhibition on, and that's very much thinking about how this is quite a complex situation. We've got certain actions that we've been used to taking. We've got to kind of scale that up. This is where all the conversation about rewilding and things starts coming in, giving the ecology and its processes a chance at scale to really operate, so that we can get our kind of abundances and viable populations back within the ecosystems they need to be part of. But then we've got decisions to make in terms of what are much wider impacts from sustainability in our choices and things like that. So it's not necessarily easy, and that's why I think it's perfectly adequate to call it a crisis as well, because the kind of interventions that are needed, it's a difficult decision now. You've got to imagine what kind of level of difficulty that's going to be in another decade or another 2 decades. It starts to become, basically, it won't be a choice. Other things will have to happen. So we're passing that decision and level of choice onto the next generation, who are obviously coming out as more unhappy at the inaction. So being involved in conservation work for decades and knowing that they managed to get a consensus in 1992 about the importance of this. That was at the Rio Earth Summit. That kicked off all the climate change stuff, all the biodiversity crisis stuff, and it still, after decades, fact after fact after fact is coming out. But that doesn't mean to say we're not having wins within that. We know what's successful often, and we know where to influence in terms of policy and on our actions and things. So we can do that, and that's not all being negative. We know nature-friendly farming networks and things, that can all be done right if we get the right steps in place.